The evolving hierarchy of influence, from obedience to discernment. Every human being enters this world in a state of complete vulnerability, ignorant, dependent, and unguarded. We are not born thinking critically or questioning motives. We are born absorbing, reflecting, imitating. From the very first breath, we begin receiving messages, some spoken, others subliminal, from parents, caregivers, society, culture, and later the state. In the early years of life, we obey before we understand. We accept before we evaluate. We conform before we question. But at some point in our journey, this must shift. It must. Because if it doesn't, we remain spiritually stunted. Adults in appearance, but still children in intellect and discernment. The transition from childhood to adulthood is not merely biological. Puberty is not enough. Voting is not enough. Paying bills is not enough. True adulthood is spiritual and intellectual. It begins when we start thinking independently, when we begin holding our beliefs up to the light and asking, where did this come from? Is it true? Is it divine? Or is it merely inherited? Is it popular? Or is it correct in the eyes of Allah? This is the foundation of discernment. And it is through this discernment that one returns to the only source that cannot mislead, the divine revelation, Quran and Sunnah. Every soul must eventually undergo this reckoning. And it is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of sincerity. The journey from blind obedience to conscious submission is what separates a follower of culture from a servant of God. Let us walk through the stages of influence in a human life, the evolution of authority from parents to peers to the state, and how, if left unexamined, these voices can eclipse the voice of truth. Let us examine why each human being must ultimately reevaluate their entire framework of thought through the lens of divine guidance. In the beginning, we enter what can be called the age of innocence, a stage of total dependence and parental imprint. From birth through early childhood, a child has no filter, no criteria to distinguish truth from falsehood. They absorb whatever they see, hear, and feel. Their world is their parents. Their environment is truth. Their caregivers are not just guardians, they are the first architects of the child's worldview. The child is born with an innate fitra, a natural inclination toward God and goodness. But this fitra is shaped, sometimes distorted, by the beliefs, emotions, and fears of the parents. Whether the home is spiritually sound or spiritually bankrupt, the child internalizes it all. Culture, superstitions, biases, priorities, all passed down without scrutiny. Then comes the age of expansion. As the child grows, the circle of influence widens. Friends, teachers, and media step in. The state begins to play a more active role. Now the child is exposed to school curriculums designed not just for education but indoctrination. Teachers deliver ideologies alongside arithmetic. Media, cartoons, films, apps subtly reshape the child's sense of morality. Nationalism is glorified. Patriotism becomes the new religion. Obedience to the state is sold as virtue. What is legal is assumed to be moral. What is banned is assumed to be evil. The state becomes a godlike figure, deciding what is right, what is wrong, what is real, what is not. In this environment, divine guidance is slowly replaced with secular values masked as human rights or social progress. The Quran warns us about this very phenomenon. Have you seen the one who takes his desires as his God? They take their rabbis and monks as lords besides Allah. Imam at-Tirmidhi explains this verse clearly. The people did not literally worship their scholars, but they obeyed them in what Allah had prohibited, and that obedience became a form of worship. In today's world, this takes a new form. Governments, ideologies, and social movements take on a godlike status. They redefine good and evil. They reward conformity. They punish dissent. And the average person follows blindly, unaware of how deeply their mind has been colonized. But a time must come when the thinking human reaches the turning point, the stage where intellectual and moral accountability begins. In Islam, this is the age of taklif, the point at which you are no longer excused by ignorance. At this stage, the sincere soul must begin to ask difficult but necessary questions. Who taught me what I believe? Was it my society, my parents, my teachers, or was it Allah? Is this belief based on revelation or media programming? Am I holding on to a cultural norm or a divine command? This stage is a jihad, not a physical one, but an intellectual and spiritual struggle. The jihad to cleanse your mind of inherited falsehoods and replace them with verified truth. And this requires immense courage. Courage to question the culture that raised you. Courage to confront the government you were taught to trust. Courage to challenge even the beliefs of the parents you love. It is only after this struggle that a person can reach the next stage. The Quran and Sunnah become the final reference point. Here, divine revelation replaces human opinions. The sincere believer comes to realize that no parent, no teacher, no state has the authority to override the word of Allah. This is spiritual maturity. This is independence of the soul. At this point, when a government legalizes what Allah has forbidden, the believer does not comply. When a loved one promotes an un-Islamic view, the believer respectfully disagrees. When the culture glamorizes sin, the believer opts out, even if it means isolation or mockery. Because here, obedience is no longer to trends, traditions, or tyrants, but to truth. But this clarity of thought must not stay personal. It must become active. The next stage is correcting authoritative figures. Submission to Allah demands not just internal clarity but public responsibility, speaking truth upward, not just to peers but to parents, teachers, scholars, and even rulers. The Quran is filled with examples of prophets who corrected those in positions of power. Ibrahim, peace be upon him, corrected his own father, even in the face of emotional abuse. Musa, peace be upon him, confronted Pharaoh, the most powerful tyrant of his time. The message is clear. Truth is not based on who says it, but whether it aligns with divine revelation. If truth requires correcting your parents, do it with wisdom and gentleness. If it requires challenging your teacher, do it with evidence. If it requires disobeying a government order that contradicts Islam, do it with faith, because truth is not negotiable. This leads to mutual accountability, the vision of a truth society. In this stage, believers no longer seek popularity or comfort. They seek correction. They give it and they receive it. Status, age, ethnicity, and emotion are irrelevant when truth is at stake. A true ummah is built on mutual accountability. This is the only way to resist the Dajjalic system, a system that thrives on passive conformity, obedience to falsehood, and silence before injustice. The ummah must rise on the principle that truth is sacred, and it must be upheld even if it hurts the ego or disrupts the system. But perhaps the greatest challenge comes from what we face in modernity: the government as the new pharaoh. In today's world, the state has replaced divine authority with technocratic control. It does not merely govern, it defines morality, redefines family, polices speech, and enforces ideological compliance. It promotes sins as freedoms and brands piety as extremism. It uses data, algorithms, and surveillance to shape and control behavior. And like Pharaoh, it claims, "I am your Lord, the Most High." Today, the modern state echoes that claim. We decide what is moral, what is legal, and what is real. To resist this system is not mere activism, it is worship. It is standing for Allah when all other powers demand submission. But resistance requires knowledge, clarity, and a willingness to be disliked. It requires being okay with being labeled backward, extreme, or non-compliant. Because the believer does not fear the displeasure of man, only the displeasure of his Lord. In conclusion, life is a journey through many layers of influence. We are born obeying parents, grow into obeying peers, then society, and eventually the state. But unless we awaken and recalibrate, we risk obeying everything except Allah. This awakening is not disrespect. It is the sincerest form of devotion. Respect your parents, but correct them if needed. Learn from teachers, but verify their claims. Obey your government only in what is just, but never in what contradicts revelation. And above all, anchor your soul on the solid rock of Quran and Sunnah, not the shifting sands of societal trends. Because in a world full of noise, one voice must remain your highest priority: the voice of Allah. No matter how loud the world becomes.